In terms of placement in the MCU Phase 4, I think Wakanda Forever is the second most enjoyable movie to me, falling behind No Way Home. I definitely preferred it to the other entries within Phase 4. Now, in terms of overall structure, the movie focuses on the death of T'Challa and the grief that the royal family is facing, as well as introducing some new players on the scene in terms of Namor and his people, who essentially want to attack the surface world and have given Wakanda an ultimatum to either join them or basically perish with the rest of the world. In a summary, that's essentially the conflict that has to be dealt with. Deal with the new forces while at the same time dealing with the grief from the death of a family member. I'll start with my usual structure, things I liked and didn't like about the movie. My greatest positive is the overall tone. There are two extremes when it comes to Marvel movies. Some are in the center, but those that go to the extreme are like the super funny, constantly goofy side with like Guardians and Ant-Man, and then the very serious side like Winter Soldier and Civil War. I prefer the latter, and this movie is solidly in that group. It definitely focuses more on being serious than jokes. There are still silly lines said by everyone at some point, but for the most part, it's mainly left to certain characters, and for the most part, everyone is not constantly making jokes all the time. A good amount of the movie is actually allowed to be relatively serious. There are good emotional scenes, in my opinion. Mostly they are carried by the actors and the music. I don't think it's the script that makes them work. As with many of these types of movies, the more you think about them, the more they begin to crack at the seams. But taken in a vacuum, the scenes are very effective. Again, most of because of the great work of the performers, how it's directed, and the music that's playing. So I'll still say that those were pretty effective when they happened. There is also a greater indulgence into the general Wakandan area. We get to see a lot more of the streets. We get to see a lot more of the location than we did the first time. I find personally, I was a lot more curious about what's going on down there. Like what do they dress up in when they are not, for example, like the Dora Milaje, right? How do they dress when they are not out fighting? And it's just little stuff like that. When I follow superhero stories, I'm also curious about that kind of stuff. So that was nice to see. There was a nice scene with Michael B. Jordan. I won't go into the spoilers or details, but that was a nice scene, and the actors overall did a good job as they usually do with MCU products. That is my positives for the movie. So, in terms of what I did not like, um, the movie overall feels very long. When it comes to pacing of movies, there are those which feel long and yet they're short, and those which feel short even though they are long, depending on the proper use of time. I can't maybe put it in extreme detail, but this movie to me felt like it was too long. Like there was a lot of time spent in a lot of circular conversations and also switching, location to location and dealing with one little thing at a time. And I think this ties into my second point, so I'll put them together. There was a good part of this movie that to me feels like it does not need to be there. Everything to do with the foreign powers, the US, the FBI, the CIA, Louis Dreyfus's character. I don't know it almost feels like they're trying to set up task force, whatever they are called. Sorry, not task force X, the Thunderbolt. And to me, those were the weakest parts of the story. They kind of broke. You'd be following the serious story, and then you'd kind of break focus and then have to deal with these other characters. And I felt like everything that was outside of Wakanda Shuri, the royal family, and Namor and his people. Every time it went away from those people and went to like the United States, that's where the movie, in my opinion, was at its weakest because it constantly feels like all of this doesn't need to be here, especially with a movie that feels as long as this one does. It definitely feels like a lot of time is being wasted with scenes that the movie would be much stronger without. And on that note, when it comes to all of that, the biggest offender is Riri Williams. This character I really did not like. Um, First of all, she falls into the category of things that I felt did not need to be in the movie for it to work. I mean, of course, there is a reason why she's there in the story. She has something to do with the overall plot, but that could easily be written out and explained differently by a competent writer. It doesn't have to be there. They simply put her in, I guess, to prepare fans for her future projects, as the MCU tends to do. But I felt like her initial impression was really bad. Like when I compare her to like Spider-Man's initial introduction or Black Panther's, Riri Williams does not have that kind of impact. It doesn't leave me wanting to see more of this character. It's a combination of I felt the actor not being either really good or well directed or just not charming enough. Um, I guess what they tried with her is different from anything else that's going on in the MCU. But when it comes to these, um, I think it's not a secret that Disney has been trying to get their, ever since they purchased Marvel, they have their own characters, right? And they're always trying to market them and push them into every game and product. I'm talking your Kamala Khan's, America Chavez, Miles Morales. Um, Riri Williams is one of those characters. The new Captain Marvel, and they are constantly trying to push them in everything. And so far they've been doing a good job. I liked Kate Bishop in the Hawkeye show. This version of America Chavez we had in Multiverse of Madness is my favorite version of that character I've seen yet, and I've read the ones in the comics. I was also curious how they'll implement Miles Morales because I believe that they will. And Riri Williams is the first one that I haven't liked. Um, I do not feel like I don't know if it's just the wrong person chosen, the wrong direction for the character. I was just not feeling it. She wasn't funny when she speaks. She wasn't very charming, in my opinion, and I felt like it just generally they wanted to go with a more comedic character, and it just didn't work. They kept saying that she's some kind of great scientist. They keep calling her the scientist, but nothing about the character feels scientific to me. Like I don't mean to stereotype, but I mean I work in tech. I've worked in tech for many years, and no offense, but there is nothing she does or says within the entire movie that makes it seem like she has even the slightest understanding of science, other than the fact that the story says that she does. I also did not like her suit. I hope they do. Okay, it stayed in Wakanda at the end, so hopefully we won't have to deal with that one going forward. But that was another thing I really did not appreciate as well. Anyway, I've spent a lot of time on that one character. I think that's because that was my weakest element of the. I felt like if that was cut out, to me the movie would be much stronger for it. That Riri Williams and everything to do with her really did not need to be in the movie. I also felt like there was not enough exploration of the Mayans. This again ties into the point I've just made, where time was being spent dealing with other things instead of focusing on the main force that we should be dealing with. They give Nemo some backstory, but they don't really get into the culture of the people. When we do explore them, it's mostly because they're underwater, so they don't speak. They generally just swim around for the most part. There is one or two of them that are allowed to speak, but the rest don't really say much. It's mostly Nemo that you interact with. I felt like it would have been nice to get a good feel for their society and maybe even set up some future projects down there, but it feels like they might be a one off. I feel like Nemo might be the only person that they reuse from that setting, which, in my opinion, I felt was not very. Uh, it could. I felt maybe they should have done that differently. Finally, I felt like the movie had a very weak conclusion. that the way that the resolution is reached at the end between the two main conflicting parties, it almost to me felt like, and I've said this in a previous video, the Last of Us 2isms, whereby things are resolved in this extremely unsatisfying way. Like two forces fight each other. Just think of it like, okay, if I'm not to use The Last of Us, I'll use the Martha moment, right? From Batman v Superman. There's this conflict, it's been built up, whether well or badly, it's been built up, right? And then at the last second, something, sorry, something silly happens, and then they just drop the conflict just ends right there and then. And you're like, what the hell? Hello? I hate that kind of, I really, really hate that kind of ending. And I guess it was a foregone conclusion that it had to end that way. I mean, I don't think Marvel or Disney have the balls to give us like a genuinely satisfying kind of ending. I think those kind of things ended in the previous phases. But I was very disappointed with how the final conflict was resolved in this movie. And yeah, I think that's my initial thoughts just coming off the movie. Again, I've said a lot of negative things, so it might sound like I didn't like the movie, but and make no mistake, I don't think it's great. I think that just by Phase 4 standards, I think it's probably the second best thing that has come out. I'm really hoping that Phase 5 will be better than everything that's happened in Phase 4, and hopefully the MCU can get back on track. I started following Marvel comics because of the MCU. I basically was a DC guy growing up, and I hope that somewhere along the way they'll get back on track so they can be, the great properties that they've always been. Other than that, I guess that's my thoughts.